Oh man, these guys right here. Oh, I've got a history with these guys. I have to divulge this information. We have a lot of fun at conferences, not because we're just at the conference and it was so thrilled by the activity, the folks, the keynotes, the even looking at the charlatans that we've seen, and and some of the really serious folks we've actually engaged with and had transactional scenarios with. But these guys have a grasp on the landscape of what's happening in blockchain and crypto for quite some time. I can attest to that. Can you please introduce yourselves to the DLive BlockShow Cointelegraph community? Tell them what you do, tell them what you've done, tell them what is happening right now, please.
All right, so I'll start. My name is Mansoor. I'm a partner at Blockchain Founders Fund. And so we invest in early stage companies, and I'll let Ali do the rest.
Ali Madhavji, managing partner at Blockchain Founders Fund. As Mansoor mentioned, we invest in blockchain companies all around the world. We also run a venture builder. We help early stage companies scale. And we run a consulting arm that actually works with the United Nations on applying emerging technology to help alleviate poverty. And so we work with a few dozen governments there. We also help lead blockchain initiatives for INSEAD, which is one of the top business schools around the world. And we're also LPs at Loyal VC.
So, yeah, they know a lot of shit, okay? But what the best part is these are humans that understand the pain points of the everyday person. You heard how they're approaching poverty, and they can sit in the room with governments, with politicians, and explain to them why we need to take this technology and apply it to almost everyone on this planet, living and not. In certain circumstances, there's some interesting things happening there. But the most fun that we've had the past 2 days is Blockbusters, Cointelegraph, and BlockShow's competition with blockchain and crypto. Can you guys were on stage. You guys saw some interesting competition. And can you tell me just your takeaways from that right now?
Yeah, so Crypto Busters was fantastic.
Thank
there was some really, really great companies that have a lot of potential. We actually invested in some of them. One of them, and looking at another one very closely that we do advise. But there was also some disasters, which we think were complete train wrecks up there. I mean, it's good to see the contrast.
Okay.
And also made a little fun with some of the comments. The crowd loved it.
We've had a mic drop moment. I don't know the last time we've had a mic drop moment like this. We're gonna play it live, guys. I am so sorry you're gonna have to wait. We're gonna play it right now for the other community. Yeah, that happened. So, so it's been fun. What did you not like about that startup?
So I think one of the biggest problems was they decided to build out an entire ecosystem, 5 different products, from an exchange to a casino to, I don't even know what the rest of it was, but without launching any of them. Like, if you build a product, it's for a customer, it's supposed to deliver value. Absolutely. So launch it, monetize it, show some traction, then continue building, right? Why are they, coming out building the whole thing without actually creating value for anybody?
So the companies that you were interested in, that's clear. That's clear. They should have done their homework a little bit more, and it should have taken those practical applications they said that they developed and put it to use so they can come back and give you some sort of data on what's happening. Because right now, we all want to know all of these great innovations are happening, but how are they changing? How are they affecting lives? We saw this ICO to whole fallout, but the folks that kept their blinders on are developing product. In your world, in the past 18 months, let's see, can you name a couple of products that may be under your umbrella or that you've seen with associations done that you could or could not be associated with that you feel have a real product that folks should check out right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's some really good examples of kind of where this industry is moving. And so one example is a company called Keyless.
Okay.
At Loyal VC, we were part of investing in their most recent round. And what they do is they're actually a cybersecurity solution for wallets and exchanges.
Okay.
But they actually help to improve the customer experience as well by essentially eliminating passwords, but it's still 2FA related, and using biometrics such as facial recognition to replace that.
Okay.
So it's much safer, but it's also much better for the consumer. So I think that's one that really stands out. I mean, we could also look at something like on the On the law enforcement side, if you think about how do you track transactions very effectively,
Right.
there's a really interesting company called InnoDT.
Okay.
Neo Global Capital actually helped to lead their rounds, but maybe you can share a little bit more about what they're doing.
Yeah, so I think one of the big problems, with regulation when it comes to crypto and blockchain is although people and governments are starting to become aware of the benefits, the problem is that without any method to control the negatives, which have to do with like money laundering, they can't actually come up with some regulation to accept cryptocurrency and allow for it.
Okay.
And so we're going to need to have a solution that can better track, money laundering and where transactions are going, so that bad actors can be, cut out from the system or at least monitored. And so we saw recently, for example, Chainalysis helped, break up a child prostitution kind of Chainalysis solution helped break.
This is the type of information, this is the type of data that you want from the solutions, the technology that we're putting
Exactly.
out there in the market.
And I think there's a few other ones in some other spaces. So, for example, there's a company in Latin America called Agrio. So one of the big problems in emerging markets is that although 50% of GDP comes from agriculture, only 2% of bank lending portfolios are actually agricultural loans. And the UN World Bank have actually said that farmers only get about 7% of the financing that they require. And there's a big shortage to funding farmers.
Okay.
And so what they do is they use satellite imaging with, and they're using blockchain to monitor, but they create credit profiles for these farmers, and they're actually working with some large institutions to provide that information so that they can better validate whether that farmer is viable for a loan.
That's okay. I've heard a lot of use cases. Besides breaking up the there's nothing you can say about that, thank you God, right? But this, helping the farmers using satellite imaging, so not only are you helping them out with their initial development and their absolute need right now, but you're also registering their land for them. You're giving them some sort of ownership, this proof of ownership of where they are and their boundaries. You know how difficult that can be in emerging markets. We talk about somebody talk about a warlord walking. Thank you so much. Great crop. Appreciate your hard work. Goodbye. And you have zero. You don't have anything. You may have had a piece of paper 100 years ago. So these are great applications. Please, tell me a little bit more about these other applications that you've seen and these other companies, because what we are seeing and what the miss in the market right now is the understanding from the public perception of how blockchain is going to truly affect my life in a daily way. Like, I don't know. I'm hearing all of these great things, and I'm seeing all of these fantastic people talk about all of this change, and I've thrown this out before, but you're trying to explain to me why Java is going to make me a millionaire by buying something off of Amazon. Like, it's just zero correlation.
Yeah, so there's a number of other examples. I'll give you a couple that are still growing quite a lot, and I'll give you some that are actually, I'd say, very well established. You can very quickly see how this is already impacting a lot of people.
Okay.
So one example would be, there's a company called Rapids, and they're a crypto payments solution. They actually have partnered with the Sheikh Hamdan royal family in the UAE, which is launching a Hamdan token. But what they're doing that I think is really interesting is working on adoption throughout a more government level, down to merchants and down to the population. And I think that's actually interesting that they've got buy-in from the top. So that's a pretty interesting one that we think will have some pretty strong traction coming out of the UAE.
They have their hand and their grip on it. That's one of the very few places they can actually pull this off once you get the thumbs up from the top.
Exactly.
So that's fantastic, and we need to see more of the top giving thumbs up for protocols and initiatives to take place.
Exactly. So I think that's an interesting one. I think if you look at BeatDap, who's actually on stage for Crypto Busters, what they do that's very fascinating is they help ensure that reported plays by streaming services like Spotify equal actual plays, because that's what royalties are paid out on. And actually, typically, you have a 15% discrepancy on these numbers, which is a $4 billion problem.
That's a lot. That is
And so that's a fascinating solution for blockchain itself, and that's already getting a lot of interest from major labels. And so
Yes.
I think that's an interesting one to watch. I think one that's also been in the news recently that's getting a lot of traction is VeChain.
Yes.
So VeChain, a lot of people don't know, but they've got a deal with a partnership with Walmart China. And Walmart China is already doing hundreds of thousands of transactions per day on blockchain. And by the end of 2020, the goal is to have 50% of fresh meat, 40% of vegetables, and 12.5% of seafood on blockchain, which is phenomenal.
Wow, those
And-
numbers are staggering.
Yeah, and if you look at what Walmart's already done in different parts of the world, they did put pork on blockchain in China, but they actually tracked sliced mangoes from South America to North America.
Wow.
There's a lot of different middle parties as part of this.
Right.
And if you were to walk into a store, a Walmart, and say, where did these sliced mangoes come from? It used to take
single step.
7 days.
No.
Now it takes 2.2 seconds. This is already live. But think about how big of an impact this is going to have on food safety. So in 2008, you had a melamine outbreak in China, 300,000 sick babies. They couldn't get to the bottom of it quick enough.
Right.
2013, very similar. You had a horse meat scandal in Europe where horse meat was essentially being labeled as beef.
Right.
And you also had banned sport drugs being included in the food that humans cannot consume, that they were consuming. And these were even at stores like Tesco.
Right, right.
Interpol was still making arrests 4 years later, so they really couldn't get to the bottom. I mean, a very similar example, just to show you it's not just Asia or just Europe, North America had a very similar sort of issue with a listeria outbreak with Chipotle Mexican Grill.
Right, right.
42% decline in their stock price. And so this is a very clear problem that blockchain is going to impact everyone's lives. And it's not just a future thing, it's already happening
Right.
in a lot of places.
Okay. So you guys, which we all, I hope by now understand, is this is this underlying, and in a short amount of time, we won't even be talking about this, right? It's just going to be, my life is better because this happened really fast. And that's going to be, in the folks that are in this world right now, we're talking 10, 15, 30 years, are in place. So if you're not in this right now, wake up, get into play, invest in the company, play around with the market a little bit. Don't sell your shirt, do not do that. But make sure in this new economy that you're actively involved. It's the time right now. What other bits of advice can you give the world right now, the BlockShow world, the Cointelegraph world, the DLive world, in how to engage in the technology at a low level?
Why don't you start?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think there's a few different ways. I mean, crypto, of course, has been very volatile. You know, looking at some of the bigger, more stable relatively assets, such as Bitcoin, is obviously something good to have some exposure to if you
Right.
can afford that.
Right.
Similarly with some of the other bigger protocols, but I think understanding where there's actually these very big risks. So a lot of them we feel have very big governance issues.
Right.
You can see, for example, on EOS as an example, where they paid a lot of the ICO money back to shareholders.
Right.
That's a problem, right? We're seeing clear governance issues on a lot of these protocols that I think it's important to be aware of.
Okay.
I'm not going to speculate on what will happen with price there, but I think
Fair.
there are some of these problems that I think are going to continue to get worse, and I think it'll get uncovered more and more over time. And you know, I don't see a bright future for those when they have governance or ethics issues.
Okay.
And so I think that's something very important to always keep a look at. I think when you're actually looking at blockchain companies and the actual technologies, I think really understanding how they create value, not where they're saying there's blockchain.
Right.
There's actually a Gartner research report that says if you mention blockchain or if you mention cryptocurrency, it will decrease your likelihood to make a sale to a customer, and I think it's by 20 or even 30%. And so it's not about saying that it's blockchain, it's about communicating the values that you're getting across. There's more transparency. This is how it's going to create value for your end customer, or this is how it's going to create more value within your network, right? And I think that's a very important part to look at.
So you really touched on the elephant in the room, right? It's that we are all talking about these fantastic opportunities, all of these companies and the results that are truly affecting lives, saving lives, essentially. And it's proof now. We're not talking about the bullshit anymore. But But the elephant in the room is, how do we let more people know what's happening? It's part of this. It's part of what's happening right now. We're trying to educate certain people who have already a thorough understanding of what how blockchain and how crypto works to a certain level. But how do we take it to the masses and say, you brought up a good point, you don't say.
Well,
What you do is you don't. What you do is you say everything but those two words, the B and the C word, right? And then you just focus on the value. Do you want your life to be better? Do you want to live? Do you not want to? Do you want to do all these things? These are the underlying technologies that will be able to have allow you to engage in that way. But what other advice do you have?
well, so I mean, just kind of adding one more thing to that, right? You don't see ads by large banks saying, "Come bank with us. We track your transactions in MySQL database," right? So why are you bringing up we're putting on Ethereum or we're putting on any sort of blockchain? That's irrelevant to the customer, right? As Ali was saying, like, does it work? Does it solve the problem? Is it transparent, auditable, etc.? And that's the thing about communicating the value that you deliver, like solving a pain point. And so I think that's the big thing.
I think one of the things that I think really excites me, though, is actually how blockchain can change the world.
Right.
If we talk about it from a social impact perspective, or some of the things that we're doing with United Nations.
Let's talk about that for a moment. We don't spend enough time. We touched on it a little bit, but let's talk about how we can really impact lives right there and what you're doing with the United Nations.
Yeah, so I think there's a number of different areas, right? So when you talk about some of the big problems globally, is you've got a lack of identities, right? So you've got over 1.1 billion people that do not have an identity, right? That's a big problem, right? So how do we start to solve that using not only blockchain, but other sorts of innovative technologies and pairing them together? So this is something that we're actually looking at, whether or not there's solutions around just using facial recognition,
Right.
plus maybe a blockchain to actually create records in real time using things like smartphones or any sorts of cameras. Because once you kind of show up, you kind of have a sort of identity. Like, these sorts of solutions would then take out the responsibility from some of these governments, which are clearly failing to address this.
Right.
But the reason why that's important is once you actually can start to get tracked and prove who you are, then you can start to build up some sort of credit scores or
Right.
some sort of reputation scores, which are important in everyday lives. Because maybe you won't get a loan on day one once you get your identity, but maybe you can track how you've been making your payments and how you've been, some different points that can measure reputation, which can then allow you to start accessing microloans, right? Different things like this that are very valuable for emerging markets.
Okay. It's interesting when you notice that the other thing that we speak about emerging markets. Thankfully, we have mobile adoption and mobile penetration to allow this to even happen. So then we start thinking about other things in emerging markets. We have to also be aware of bandwidth, right? There's a lot of things that go into play. We're still in orbit. There's a lot of challenges, and I think what's really interesting is we're seeing companies find out unexpectedly that they do have to build other economies just to reach that goal. And if you're not thinking outside, if you are thinking inside this box with your blinders on, that's fantastic when you know for sure that you're delivering this product. But this blockchain world we're in, it's a very collaborative world. It's open, right? So we need to work a little bit more, open up the boxes a little bit more, and make sure folks understand that we may need help from different industries. We may truly need to call on a telco right now just to be able to give aid to a certain region that needs better financing, and they're saying we just want to get top off minutes, right? And that's how they're looking at that. So thankfully we have mobile adoption to reach inside
you
there.
can even touch on that from a 3G perspective.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, so like one thing I'd add to the other, to what you're just covering, is a lot of times when people look at blockchain or crypto, it's very segmented from like what's happening in the world today. Right. And one of the problems I think is that gap needs to be bridged.
Okay.
Right. So when people talk about, like, you see a lot of wallets and stuff, and it'll be like transact crypto. Well, the person who's trying to, send money to their family overseas, in a conflict zone or to Venezuela or wherever else, doesn't really care about transacting crypto.
Right.
Crypto's just the means to transact value, right? And so I think like as blockchain and crypto solutions develop and gain more adoption, we're going to see more of a bridging between traditional finance or traditional businesses implementing the solution, as opposed to like a wallet being like, we're going to take over the world with our wallet.
Exactly,
right?
exactly. Then we need that collaborative effort inside here. So I want to thank you guys so much for dropping all these pearls of wisdom. But before we leave, can you just give the DLive World, BlockShow, and Cointelegraph just a little bit of advice from something you may have experienced in the past like year, 18 months, and looking at the blockchain and crypto world? What's a little bit of advice you can give our viewers?
If you guys want to see a disappearing magic trick, put your money in an ICO.
I'm gonna have to meme his ass in a little bit because he's been dropping some shit, and you guys are gonna hear about this a little bit later. I think he might have won the award today for personality on the stage. And do you have
Since I
any
can't compete with that, I'll give a more serious note. This technology is here to stay. It is growing, and it will impact everyone on a daily basis. And so just watch how this is going to transform not only supply chain, but media and entertainment, gaming. There's a lot of industries where this is coming in and actually transforming and creating value for people. And where it's creating value for people or businesses, that's where I think it's a very exciting area to watch.
Okay.
So.
Thank you guys so much. I always appreciate sitting down and chatting with you guys. And DLive, we're out of here. We'll see you next year.